Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ بِكَلِمَاتٍ فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ. So we reached this clause of فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ, which would mean so he completed them, completed the kalamat, the expressions. Here we would have to see now who is the subject in atamma. The translation is he completed them, but the he, who does it refer to? And here there's some differences of opinion, and I will share with you what Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli and Allama Tabatabai have said about this. So Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, hafadhahullah, says that the he refers to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So recall when his Lord tested Ibrahim with the expressions, those tests. He migrated from his hometown, the test of the slaughtering of Ismail, the test of the fire, and other tests which happened. Then, according to Ayatollah Jawadi, it would then be translated as, and subsequently, he, Ibrahim, completed the expressions. So this is the first variation. He says that Ibrahim alayhi salam completed the expressions. Now he mentions a number of points. I'll mention them one by one. He says, first of all, the fa particle has been used instead of thumma, because if Allah would have said thumma atammahunna, it would mean there was a gap. So there were tests, there was a gap, then he completed them. Thumma means then. Fa, the fa of subsequence, also means then. Okay, it means so. And here, though, with fa, the gap doesn't exist. There's more of a subsequent element to it. So, he was tested, subsequently he completed them. Ibrahim completed them. And this fa particle, since there's no gap factor, it means he abided by it purely, pure servitude. It was done with utmost purity, the heart's readiness, فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ, so he completed them. If it said ثُمَّ أَتَمَّهُنَّ, ثُمَّ wouldn't have indicated the heart's readiness and purity of servitude. And so here Ibrahim completed them and he succeeded in relation to the tests. And then Qala, Allah said, Inni ja'iluka linnasi imama. To support his position, Ayatollah Jawadi says we have verses that says Ibrahim alladhi waffa, Ibrahim who has fulfilled his duties. Waffa, he fulfilled it, he abiding in relation to his duties. That shows that this he completed them is on a par with he fulfilled his duties. And he says that the verse wants to illustrate, Allah in this verse wants to illustrate Ibrahim's success in relation to the tests. He wants to demonstrate it. So he says, and Ibrahim completed the kalamat. And finally, Ayatollah Jawadi Omli says, here in this verse, when you look at the context, it's more about the actualization of the mover, which is Ibrahim, actualizing in his aim and actualizing in his success in relation to the test. The context wants to show this, rather than demonstrating or illustrating or portraying the actualization of the movement. So sometimes you're focusing on the mover, so Ibrahim's success, you want to demonstrate it. Sometimes no, it's the end story, the outcome, which you want to focus on, not necessarily Ibrahim. Ayatollah Jawadi says the focus is on Ibrahim here in this verse. Allame Tabatabai though, he says, so he completed them. The he goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first thing he says the dhahir of the verse shows this. Now in the translation, although this, as I say, the translation by Tawheed Institute, it's a very lucid translation, but sometimes there's some imprecisions that can be seen. Here, the translator for dhahir wrote in brackets that it is obviously the case. Something on those lines. It is obviously the case. So Allama says the pronoun goes back to Allah. فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ, the pronoun goes back to Allah. In brackets, the translator says, and this is obviously the case. Now there was no need for brackets, because this is a translation of what Allah is saying. The dhahir of the verse indicates that the pronoun goes back to Allah. Dhahir here means the prima facie meaning, the superficial understanding of what you read. The dhahir, the outward, superficial, apparent meaning is this. The more technical term is the prima facie meaning, not obviously is the case. Now, why would Allama say this? When you look at the Arabic, why is the prima facie meaning, when you were to read it, why is the apparent meaning that it should go back to Allah? Ayatollah Jawadi quotes this from Allama Tabatabai, and he says, well, we have to see whether it really does go back to Allah. Whether the dhahir is in fact this. Look how it's getting very... So here, فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ, atamma, he completed, the he, does it go back to Rabbuhu, Allah, or does it go back to Ibrahim? Allama Tabatabai says, well, the dhahir dictates that it goes back to Rabbuhu. And that's maybe because of a principle we have in Arabic. This atamma, the pronoun in it, huwa, he, which is the nearest subject to it. So you keep on going back till you find the nearest subject. It's Rabbuhu. Maybe that's why he said, Allama said, dhahir, Rabbuhu is the subject. So, and Allah completed them. And this Allah completing them, meaning, the Urafa like this a bit more. Now, the whole idea in the last 2 or 3 nights, I'm trying to show that this verse is portraying the gift factor of the assigning of Imamat. فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ, if it goes to which subject will the gift factor be made prominent again? If you were to say, and Allah completed them, completed the kalamat, Allah completed them, not Ibrahim. So when he would assign Imamat, when Allah completes them, it shows the gift factor here again, rather than Ibrahim meriting the station of Imamat. Look, it's very delicate, this. But if you say Ibrahim completed it, the gift factor is died down a bit, is undermined a bit. But anyway, we want to say based on the zahir, who does it go back to? Allah says this atamma goes to Rabbuhu. He says the zahir dictates this. Ayatollah Jawadi says, look, let's check if this is really the zahir or not. That's what he said, Ayatollah Jawadi Omri. Now, what I'm about to say is my understanding from what Ayatollah Jawadi has said. Allama Tabatawi did say the zahir atamma, the pronoun goes back to Rabbuhu. That's based on, he didn't say it, but this seems to be the case. It's based on Arabic syntax. When you want to find the subject, and there are two possible versions of the subject, it can't go back to kalamat naturally, so you go to the nearest one. The nearest is Rabbuhu. Allah says, the zahir says that Allah has to be the subject here. So Allah completed the test. That's in line with the gift factor of Imamat. Ayatollah Jawadi says, well, we have to see whether this really is the subject or not. Now, what may he mean here? Look, Rabbuhu. Don't overlook the who. His Lord. Who does his go back to? Who is his? Ibrahim. So here, atamahunna, the nearest subject goes to is who, rather than Rabbuhu. So this makes Ibrahim is now supporting Ayatollah Jawadi's position. This is what he meant maybe, when he said, well, we have to see really if Allah is the zahir here. But then, if you think about it, this fa particle, there are two types of fa. It's the fa of subsequence. Okay, so it means hence or therefore or so. Something happens, therefore this happens, or hence this happens. But this fa also is a conjunction fa. In addition to being that subsequence, it's also making a conjunction. We have this in Arabic syntax. And if this becomes a fa of conjunction, like and, okay, fa also, like and, are particles of conjunction. Atammahunna here is in conjunction, it's a verb. Verbs have to be in conjunction with verbs, sentences over sentences. Like coming to the house is Peter and James. You can't say it's Peter and the man who was his friend 2 weeks ago. That's a sentence. It has to be a noun like Peter. Now, فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ, this أَتَمَّهُنَّ is a verb. And if this fa is a conjunction, this, he completed it, is in conjunction with which verb? Ibtala. This. And if it's in conjunction with ibtala, who was the subject of ibtala? Who? No, that's a fail. You failed. Yes, we just start all over again here. Look, and recall when his Lord tested Ibrahim, and recall when his Lord tested Ibrahim with the expressions and then he completed them. If this he completed them is in conjunction with he tested them, who is the he in he tested them? It's Allah. You see? So the subject becomes Allah here. That's what Allah is trying to say here. And Allah said, we have a verse, we have a hadith also to support it. Ayatollah Jawadi said, look, we have to look at all the ahadith to make a decision. What the spirit of the verse is trying to say. And Ayatollah Jawadi is of the opinion the spirit of the verse is focusing on the success of Ibrahim to be portrayed, rather than the outcome. Okay, so that's what the zahir is. Even the zahir, it's on a par with atamma going back to Allah. So that was another delicate point. And the reason I kind of wanted to open that up was because, like that, if it goes back to Allah, the gift factor, Imamat is gifted. Yes, okay. Okay, then the verse continues. قَالَ إِنِّي جَائِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. That Allah said, verily I am assigning you as an imam for the people. It says the imamat is for the people. Ayatollah Jawadi has said that it's not a sultanate which is given to Ibrahim, where sultans are over the people, have control over them. It's for the people. They want to do the best for the people. They want to get people's hand and take them to their perfection. Linnas, it's for them. Because the first two caliphs, they kept on saying, we are Sultan of Muhammad. We're continuing the Sultanate of Muhammad. So Sultanate usually, the meaning is it has control over. People are undermined or looked in a different light, rather than when you're doing it for the people. You're an authority for the people. And that's how they looked at it. Although Sultan is one of Allah's names too. You can be a Sultan at the same time as being with the people. But anyway, this is a subtle point he raised. Here it says that, verily I assign you as an imam for the people. Now we've tried to establish now through different routes that this was a gift. It wasn't something which he worked for and as a direct consequence of his efforts he got. It wasn't a cause and effect. Yes, he passed a certain threshold, but the imamat given to him wasn't a direct result of Ibrahim's endeavors. It's not like ijtihad or taqwa, that if you make an effort in knowledge, for example in fiqh, after 20, 30, 40 years, then you become a mujtahid. You're qualified now. If you do the wajibat and refrain from the muharramat, you qualify as being someone with taqwa. You see, that's a direct consequence of your actions. But being assigned imamat isn't like ijtihad or taqwa. The gift factor has to be made prominent here. And the point is that first Allah says, Inni, verily I assign, no one else. And if it was something which you can acquire with cause and effect, that Inni wouldn't have been necessary. Or it being limited to Allah wouldn't have been necessary, maybe. So Allah says this, and then Ibrahim says, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. What about my descendants? And then Allah says, it doesn't reach the ظالمين. لا ينال أهدي الظالمين. Now there are many points here which we have to go through, one after the other. The first is, when it says, if I can just bring the verse so you can have it in front of you. Yes. So when it says that, La yanalu ahdi, that my covenant doesn't reach ad-dhalimin, the wrongdoers, someone may say that, so if you're not a wrongdoer, the wrongdoer can reach Allah's covenant. And the covenant here now is imamat. Someone can say that. Someone who's not a wrongdoer, when you say the wrongdoers can't reach my covenant, imamat, well, so if you're not, maybe you can then reach it then. If you're not a wrongdoer. Let's say if you're a ma'soom, you can reach it then. We've been saying that, no, this is a gift Allah gives. It's not a cause and effect relationship. We've tried to establish that through many mechanisms. But someone may say that, based on the literal understanding of the verse, my covenant doesn't reach the dhalimeen, so if you're not one of the dhalimeen, you can reach it. If you take only that clause and look at it from a very literal point of view, it's rationally possible to make that judgment. Why? Because reaching, imagine A and B. A and B reaching one another either rationally, look, only rationally. Because Allah says they don't reach. So this reaching, we have to discuss it a bit from a literal point of view. Either A and B reach one another together. So A, B, and they move together like that. And they reach one another. Or A reaches B, but B doesn't move. That's also a rational possibility. And then B doesn't move, but when A reaches B, you can say B reached A also. There's no problem there. After A reaches B, even though B was passive. Or B is active and A is passive, and B moves and reaches A like that, even though A was passive, but it would be verbally correct to say A has reached B after B has actively gone to. So these three are possible. So you can't, through the literal understanding of the verse, you can't say it's specifically meaning the first variation. All three are possible. It's only since we've established that Imamat has been assigned and only Allah can assign it, and He's done it as a gift, we say out of these three, it's the A to B variation, or B to A depending on, yes, not them both going together. But from a merely literal stance, all three are rational possibilities. But based on the context of what we've gone through, the gift factor, and it's been specific to Allah, Allah has to give it. That's another point. This fact that Allah has to give Imamat, well, first He says, Inni ja'iluka, verily I assign. So there is an emphasis on me, I'm doing it, no one else. And He says, La yanalu ahdi, that my covenant doesn't reach. Look, the covenant, the emphasis again, it's my covenant. I make that decision, no one else. These are all buttressing factors here. And He says, it doesn't reach the dhalimeen. However, we've said that it's not something which is acquired through one's endeavors. It's not the case that even if you are ma'soom, the ma'soom will be able to reach it. Not all ma'sooms are imams. All imams are ma'soom. We haven't established it yet, but we have to discuss it. It's in this verse, you can establish it. But not all ma'sooms are necessarily imams. All prophets are ma'soom, but not all prophets are imams. All rasools are prophets. All rasools are ma'soom, but not all rasools are imams. Ibrahim was a rasool, but he wasn't an imam. Musa was a rasool, but Khidr was the imam. Khidr is still alive, according to the predominant position. It's thousands of years now. But he's an imam with the providential order. So even between the time between the two prophets, like let's say Nabi Isa and the prophet before Nabi Isa, or Nabi Isa and the prophet after Nabi Isa, when one prophet goes, although with Nabi Isa he didn't go, but let's say with other prophets, in between the existed, okay, there's no prophet, the prophets passed away, but the presence of Khidr as a providential Imam, things are still in order. Look, we've gone through Amr in some detail now. Now we understand why there always has to be an Imam. There always has to be an Imam. They yahduna bi-amrihi. We said Amr is a providential order. Look, even the musakharatun bi-amrih, the sun, the stars, the light of all the planets and everything, it's all bi-amrihi. So without an Imam, you won't have anything. Allah's lordship has to manifest through its means. So this idea that the 12th Imam hasn't come yet, which our brothers in some denominations, look, it's a very limited understanding. It's a very limited understanding why they say we're still waiting for the Imam. Now some people may want to put some doubt on the existence of the 12th Imam. And they say the 12th Imam never existed. The son of Imam Hassan al-Askari, we have no proof for it. Now some people, it may be a legitimate question. One shouldn't be afraid of such questions. It's through these kind of questions one gets stronger and stronger in knowledge. But if they were to tell you that, why do you believe in the 12th Imam? Because the name isn't mentioned. We know that there has to be an Imam. That's okay, that's the Quran. But if they were to say, so who is it? Now we say it's the Mahdi. May Allah expedite his advent. But if they say, how do you know he exists? Okay, you say there has to be an Imam because everything is in order. And you get it from the Quran, yahduna bi-amrihi. But how do you know he exists, the sun? How do you know there was a sun? It's a legitimate question. Now if you say because of ahadith, okay, you're right. There are more than enough, multiple, excessive ahadith with this meaning. Sometimes even with the name of the 12 Imams. We have that. And I'll speak more about those hadith later. But let's say we don't even accept the ahadith for whatever reason. At least look, there's something called history. The 12th Imam, the time of Imam Hassan al-Askari with his son, we're talking about the 3rd century and the 4th century. The minor occultation of 70 odd years was in the 3rd and 4th century. Here, they had deputies, they had legal representatives. The 4 deputies they were the major ones, but there were much more than 4. Then books of history are telling us, books of history in the 4th century, in the 5th century, there are books. History is a science, it has principles. You go through them, they give you the names of the deputies, not the ahadith. Khomeini, who compiled Al-Kafi, lived through the times of the deputies. He even saw the deputies, okay? But the major fuqaha of that era, they would send their questions to the deputies. But even, I don't want to look at those yet. We're going to speak much more about it later. Because those deputies came with many responses. Those responses are very interesting to know what they were. For example, the fuqaha of the time would ask questions and the deputies would go to the 12th Imam, get the response and give it back. Everyone was content. But my point is, books of history are recounting the lives of these deputies. They were well integrated with proper decorum, good ethics. They weren't liars, they weren't imposters. Even those who imposted as a 12th Imam, when they realized they can't deceive the people, they became very close with the deputies and spoke very highly of them. My point is this, when we have books of history connected to the time of the minor occultation, with all the events narrating it, to deny the existence of Imam Hassan al-Askari's son, you would have to say it was all a game. It was all a big plan. 70, 80 years of the major it was all of the minor occultation, they were always playing. There was no Imam. And all those answers were from them themselves. When they themselves, they were well-integrated people, but they weren't the most learned. In fiqh, there were people more learned than the deputies. And then those who were more learned than the deputy would ask their questions. The deputies would go to the 12th Imam, come with the answer. They were all content. So, although I don't want to go through the history now, but we may go through it in one of the sessions. We'll go through all the books of history, how the lives of the deputies, what they've said, the events which happened at that time. And then when you keep on accumulating the historical evidences, eventually the historian will say, even if they're a kafir, no, the patterns here suggest there was such a person. Now, I've put the ahadith aside here. Otherwise, if you go through the ahadith, it's without doubt they existed and the 12th Imam existed. You can't just turn a blind eye. And I'll give examples of this when we discuss the Kafi and Kulaini, how he compiled Kafi later. Now, so here, I diverted a bit here, but now here, many ma'sooms may not be given Imamat, the station of Imamat. So that's where we left it off. Allah only gives Imamat. And in the Quran, there's one verse, Allahu a'lamu haythu yaj'alu risalata. Only Allah knows of where He places His risala. Only Allah knows who to give it His message to, this covenant to. Who is it? Only Allah knows. Why? And there are other verses too. In chapter 28, verse 85, قُلْ رَبِّي أَعْلَمُ مَنْ جَاءَ بِالْهُدَى. Say, my Lord knows, only He knows who comes with guidance. This a'lamu from the paradigm, you translate as only He knows. I would have to explain something grammatical, but I think I don't want to divert too much. Or chapter 617, وَهُوَ Allah, He, only He, أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. He only knows the truly guided ones. So only Allah can nominate or appoint the station of Imamat, not the people. Who are the people? When the person who is nominated as a prophet or the Imam, they have to be ma'soom. Now, ma'soom, they've never sinned. How can a person know that in someone? Only Allah knows that. You can't just in Saqifa, what was happening in Saqifa? What on earth were they thinking of? It's evident, it was all about usurpation. They usurped the whole damn thing. We can't just turn a blind eye there, it was wrong. So, Ismat is required. Only Allah can tell if someone is ma'soom. And it's something which only Allah can give as a gift. And so it can only be identified by Allah. So only Allah can tell us who the Imam is. How? Through the texts. Which texts? The Quran and the Ahadith. Ahadith of the Holy Messenger and the Imams. Because only Allah can tell us who it is, no one else. Yes, objectively, if we were there with the Imams at that time, if we didn't have the text with us, by just looking at people, we can tell. Just compare the Imam with other than the Imam, you can tell who has done wrongdoings. You can tell who has bowed down before an idol. You can tell, it's something even objectively you can tell. Even rationality can guide you by saying, "No, this person, I've never seen a wrongdoing from this person. But this person, he's a good person, but he's done some wrongdoings. We know who he is." See, then you can compare. But otherwise, only Allah knows, and therefore only Allah should tell us. In the Quran, Allah has told us, and in the Ahadith, the Prophets and the Imams, through Allah, have told us. Now, here, but the point is that only Allah can tell, therefore only Allah should appoint. Now the angels who are described in chapter 21 verse 26 as Ibadun Mukramun, honored, dignified servants of Allah, who in chapter 66 verse number 6 are described as La Ya'sun Allah, they don't rebel against Allah, the angels. Even they who were ma'soom, the angels, when Allah came with the creation of the Khalifa, Inni ja'ilun fil ard, the Khalifa, even they couldn't tell. They couldn't tell that Adam should be the Khalifa. But they were ma'soom and they couldn't tell. This shows only Allah knows. Only Allah can appoint. You may be an angel, you may be ma'soom, but you still don't know whether this person is the Imam or not. You may be an Imam, but you don't know who the next Imam is, unless Allah tells you. And in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 30, Inni ja'ilun fil ard khalifa, verily I assign on earth a Khalifa, a successor, Allah's successor. Other verses, chapter 38, verse 71, Inni ja'ilun basharan min teen, verily I create, only I create, Allah, people from clay, from earth. Here, some scholars have said, look, only Allah creates, only Allah assigns. So it's only Allah. Now, is creating a function of assigning, or is assigning a function of creating? Which one is more universal? Which one is a subset of the other? Well, first, Allah is a creator, then He assigns. And this shows that if assigning is a function of creatorship, only the Creator can assign. Only a Creator can assign the Khalifa, assign the Imam. Look, the word Allah, even look, when you look at the words, the word Allah, what does it mean? Literally. Here, morphologically, I can speak for lectures here. Great grammarians who happen to be Iranian, like Sibawayh, Kasai, all these they've written pages and pages on this. But anyway, Allah means the worshipped one. But the worshipped one who merits to be worshipped. If someone doesn't merit to be worshipped, the Arabs won't say, this is Allah. They won't say Allah. They may give other names to idols or whatever, but Allah is the worshipped one who merits to be worshipped. That's the definition of Allah. Literal definition. The technical definition, then the theologians have one definition, the Urafa have another definition. Okay, then, so Ma'bud, the worshipped one is Ma'bud. It comes from Aleha. So the question is, what does being Ma'bud mean? What does Ma'bud mean? Here. The worshipped one, what's the reality of being worshipped? What's its literal meaning? They say Ma'bud, the worshipped one means one who has to be obeyed and merits to be obeyed. And that's why Ma'bud, ibadah, is a form of submission. The source who merits to be submitted to. Look, this is all from the literal understanding of the words here. You go through the dictionaries of the medieval times, where they explain the words of the Quran, what it meant at that time. Because sometimes when you look at the same word today, it may have another connotation today. But these are very simple definitions. And so Allah means the worshipped one who merits to be worshipped, merits to be submitted, merits to be obeyed. So when He creates and then assigns someone with a khilafah, with imamat, with nubuwwat, he has to be obeyed. If you don't obey him and obey other than him, yes, you've compromised here. You're not obeying Allah anymore. Your ego has predominated. Only Allah should be obeyed. And we've seen what Allah is saying in relation to the assignment of the Imam. Let's go through a few verses. One verse, there are many. I've given the addresses of all of them, but I'll just go through one or two of them. In this verse, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, ati'u Allah, obey Allah, wa ati'ur Rasul, and obey the Rasul. Then it says, wa ulil amri minkum. The word amr has come here again. Uli means the owners of, the possessors of. And obey the messenger and the owners of amr amongst you. That's the literal translation. Now look here. It says obey Allah. Why does the verse say obey Allah and the Prophet? Why is ati'u, obey, repeated for the Prophet? Look, if I say to someone, obey your father and mother, that would be logical. It wouldn't make sense to say, obey your father and obey your mother. There's no need to repeat obey again. If you repeat obey again, there has to be a reason why. And the reason means there's a qualitative difference between this obey and that obey. Because obeying Allah independently, obey the Rasul too, but obeying the Rasul isn't exactly like obeying Allah. Since he is manifesting Allah's attributes, you obey him. But the source of obedience to the Prophet is not independent, it's because of Allah. So obey has been repeated, suggesting that this second obey, it's significantly, substantially different in nature to the first obey. We don't obey the Prophet like we obey Allah. Okay? But obeying the owners of Amr, it says obey the messenger and the owners of Amr. There's no obey again. Which means obeying the owners of Amr is exactly like obeying the Prophet. Now, the Prophet, even our Sunni brothers accept, he was ma'soom. So, there has to be a commonality, a common denomination between the ulil amr and the Prophet. And this verse shows that. And therefore, that's why they say the ulul amr. Now, the ahadith then say, the Shias, they go, there's 12 Imams, but even the Sunnis, they go up till Imam Hussein. Even the Sunnis, in the standard major tafsirs that they have, they speak about it's the Holy Messenger, Amirul Mu'mineen, Hassan, Hussein, alayhim as-salam, and so on and so forth. So even they have it, but we have it in much more depth. But the point is, there's a synchronicity between ulil amr and the Prophet. And the synchronicity seems to be they both are ma'soom. Because how can you, here it says obey in the absolute sense. How can you obey someone who's a wrongdoer, even partially? That would be a contradiction here. Obey the messenger, obey the ulil amr. So this ulil amr must be like the messenger. In what regard? Ismat. Now, can ulil amr refer to other than the 12 Imams? Okay? If you say no, okay, no one's going to force you or anything. If you say yes, that other than the 12 Imams, people can qualify as ulil amr. If you say yes, do you mean it in complete terms or partial terms? If they say complete terms, it's getting very heavy here. Say, okay, it's better if we don't speak a bit. Yes, you're scaring me now. If you say in partial terms, okay, let's speak a bit more here. Now, I've just signposted a few things there. I'm not going to go into detail right now, but anyway, this is one verse, the verse of obedience they call it, where even in the ahadith from all denominations, they say who it is. Now, just this as a marginal point, this point of repeating something, the Urafa pay a lot of attention to this. Look at this next verse. I'm comparing two verses here. La tajidu qawman, you won't perceive a people, yu'minuna, who believe, billah, in Allah, the ba preposition, billah, wal yawm al-akhir, and the day of the last day. You won't see them having affection. Yuwadduna man hadallah wa rasulah. You won't see them showing affection, these believers of billah wal yawm al-akhir. You won't see them showing affection to those who are enemies of Allah and the Messenger. Now, this has a lot of meanings, but I want to focus on one small point here. Yes, it shows that if you are friendly with the enemy, Allah's enemy and everything, yes, your tawheed or ma'ad is compromised. But that's not something I want to focus here. It doesn't say billah wa bil yawm al-akhir. The ba preposition is not repeated. You won't perceive a people who believe in Allah and the day of resurrection, the last day. It doesn't say you don't perceive a people who believe in Allah and in the last day. Why? Because the belief in Allah and they're synchronous with one another. They believe in both. Then you may say, well, in all the Quran we have, this is the language they use. We say, no, don't rush into it. Chapter 2, verse 8. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, and amongst the people, there are those who say, Amanna, we believe, billah wa bil yawm al-akhir. It's repeated here. When you see it repeated, be suspicious. Why is it repeated here? There was no need, like here. These are munafiq. Their belief in Allah and their belief in the last day are not synchronous with one another. That's the definition of a munafiq. When it repeats the ba preposition, this in Allah and the in the last day, they're two different ins. They're qualitatively different. This shows the hypocrisy here. وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ, and they're not believers. When Allah wants to tell people who just say we believe, He repeats the ba preposition. Ibn Arabi, he's one of the Urafa. He goes through all these prepositions. The irfan of the Quran is in the prepositions, in the particles. Yes. Okay. So that's another point which I wanted to mention. I want to try and finish this, inshallah. This is another verse. It's to do with Ghadir, and all denominations accept it. Where it says, Ya ayyuha rasul, balligh ma unzila ilayka min rabbik. Announce what has been revealed to you from your Lord. Look, this was to do with the successorship of Amirul Mu'mineen, and the Sunnis have it in their ahadith. But, O Prophet, Allah is saying, you're just an announcer. I appointed Ali, Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Announce what you've been revealed by me. Only Allah can appoint. These scholars, they're saying the Prophet appointed Amir al-Mu'mineen independently. And each Imam appointed the succeeding Imam independently. They don't say Allah revealed it to them. That would be a monarchy. That would be a monarchical system. Father and son like that. We say, no, Allah appointed. When you say Allah appointed, it's finished. It doesn't matter if they're father or son or not father or son. And then it continues. وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ, if you don't, if this message doesn't come out, then you haven't conveyed Allah's message. It would be deficient. And here it was the Imamat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This verse came many times to the Holy Prophet. Sayyid ibn Tawus in his Iqbal has written about this. But the Prophet this was such a sensitive theme. He was afraid that Islam may come to an end because of the enemies. The enemies were ready to destroy Islam, but Ali shouldn't be announced. Maybe one lecture we have to go through this. The point he was mentioning was, it came to him, but he did taqiyyah, the Holy Messenger. Taqiyyah, we have to speak about taqiyyah. The Prophets have done taqiyyah and the Imams have done taqiyyah. Not the case that the Prophets don't do taqiyyah, but the Imams do taqiyyah. No, they have both done taqiyyah. And history has shown hundreds of examples of the Holy Prophet. You just look at his migration to Medina. Just study the migration to Medina. You're going at night. No one's seeing him. Then he goes into a cave. Then he takes the longest route. Just look at the route. He chooses the longest. Why? And all these are examples of taqiyya. But here Allah says that Wallahu ya'simuka minan nas. Allah will protect you from the people. Don't worry. This has to come out. Announce the successorship of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And all the Sunnis too, they accept this in the original books of Ahadith. The Shias, multiple sources. So this is another example of Allah appointing. But the name Mahdi, the name Amir al-Mu'mineen hasn't been given. Or the names of the 12 Imams haven't been given. That too has a logic why. If the names were given, they would have destroyed the verses. Look, they were ready to kill the Prophet, and they're not ready to delete the verse of the Quran. Which is higher, the Quran or the Prophet? In the hadith of Thaqalain, I have two precious weights, the book of Allah and the Prophet. Well, one's a silent Quran, one's a talking Quran. If they're ready to kill the talking Quran, won't they destroy the silent Quran? Look, this a fortiori, they would get rid of that. Anyway, taqiyya we'll speak about because many people have misunderstood it. So this is another verse. Another verse is the verse of purity. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل فجر. And I won't go through this. It's evident that all impurities have been taken away from them. And all other verses too. Now these are general verses which are indicating the Ma'sumeen, the Imams, and so on and so forth. And whoever wants the slides, you just ask Faroukh group and they will send you the slides, there's no problem. And there are many traditions in this regard. Okay, now, the next point is La yanalu ahd al-zalimin. Okay, this is the last point, but it may take 10 or 15 minutes. And I think we're approaching at 1 hour. So I would have preferred if we could finish this. So from tomorrow we start a new area. I think if we don't rush it, there may be some questions. You may email me and I can then fit it in for tomorrow's lecture. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى الطاهرين.